Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Solari Report. This is a special report and a special treat because I am finally able to interview a colleague and new friend that I can't tell you how much you're going to learn today. I don't need to tell you that we will just do it. I want to introduce Carl von Wolferen, who is a journalist, a publisher, a author, a professor here in the Netherlands. He is known for his incredible work on Japanese society, a very famous book, The Enigma of Japanese Power. I brought my copy with me. And he thought he was going to enjoy a quieter period in his life, but COVID hit, so he started a new magazine, right? And author of many books, but somebody who I've come to really value his opinion. And I've been sitting here as we've waited to start the interview, and it's one question after another. I hate people who do it to me, but I always do it to you. So, Carl, welcome to the Solari Report, and thank you so much for inviting us into your beautiful library and home to do this interview.
Thank you for doing this. Of course, I'm very interested in what you write, and I've been following you, and I think that we are a little mutual admiration clique here.
I know, but you have a much greater depth of knowledge historically, particularly of Europe and Asia, than I do. So I'm an investment banker.
I can't match what you know about the financial world,
right?
And so I think we balance out.
Okay. Well, so something has happened. We have a Russian invasion of the Ukraine. You have a lot of understanding of the Ukraine, of NATO. Let's just dive in, and if you could talk a little bit about the history of the Ukraine, particularly from the events in 2014 forward. Take it whichever way you want, but let's talk a little bit. What's the historical context of what's happening today?
Well, 2014 was obviously very important because we had a coup. It was a coup. The Western pundits, commentators, historians keep on talking about a revolution that started with students, the usual suspects, and they were, in fact, they started in the months before, in the winter of 2013. With grievances that were legitimate, etc. So that's how things began. But it was a coup that was, George Soros played a major role. It's the NGOs of Soros and the NGOs of the National Endowment of Democracy, which of course is a congressional thing. And during the Cold War, the NED would help dissent in the communist countries, pay them for mimeograph machines for their samizdat literature and things like that. And Karl Gershman, who ran the show then, I knew him personally. I met him a few times, and as far as I could tell, this was a genuine effort. But then the wall fell. The Soviet Union disappeared. This, of course, soon thereafter. And there was absolutely no need for the National Endowment of Democracy to continue working. But like with those, so very often with those things,
they never know how to die.
It works, and then it continued to exist in order to help influence things to go the way that Washington wanted. And I think Soros played probably the more important role. But yet Victoria Nuland, who was the undersecretary of something or other. And she boasted once that they spent $5 billion to get this far, to get this coup. Didn't call it a coup, but that's what it was. That, of course, changed the Ukraine from a relatively sovereign country into a country controlled, remote controlled by Washington, and in a more direct fashion controlled by the CIA for detailed operations, false flags and what have you. MH17 is an example, and many other examples. I don't think anything important happened in Ukraine without either the consent or the orders of the CIA and Washington a little bit farther away.
One of the things that really I find very noticeable about the Ukraine is if you look at where Eastern Europe was economically when the wall came down, so 89 to 91, Poland has dramatically increased its per capita income. Russia has dramatically increased its per capita income. The Ukraine has never increased its per capita income. In fact, if you look last year, it dropped. It was 1,400.
It's choking with oligarchs who enriched themselves, as happened in Yeltsin's time, in the Russian Federation.
But it's a society whose destruction is defined by organized crime.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's absolutely, my concern, because Chernobyl happened in the Ukraine before the wall came down. Right. A society can only implode so far before very dangerous things start to happen.
Right.
And you're really looking, if you look at the poverty in the Ukraine, it's absolutely phenomenal that a society that is that intelligent and has, the kind of skills or education that the Ukrainians, or resources as the breadbasket, that such a society could fall to such a degree of debasement. It's very shocking to me.
Yeah, it is shocking. But, any society that's, how shall we call it, that is that suffers from a criminal networks.
Yes.
But our last 2 years, Europe, maybe more than the US in a little bit in a different way. And of course, the countries like Australia and New Zealand and Canada, the Five Eyes countries, suffer from a crime syndicate that has been trying to establish a totalitarian system, a supranational totalitarian system, with the World Economic Forum as an important coordinating, organizing center. And it's a crime syndicate.
Right.
It's something that is going to create, or they're going to create, in the long run, a slave society.
So it's interesting. The Russians have been very clear for over a decade. They watched what happened in Libya. They watched what happened in Syria. I remember as a child reading about the conquest of the Roman Empire and being taught that the Roman Empire brought infrastructure. They brought education. They brought roads. They brought bridges. They brought water systems. When you watch Charlie Ferguson's documentary on Iraq, what you realize is the neocons, and this I associate these, Terry Mousson calls them the Straussians. Yeah. But the neocons, they bring chaos. They bring the end of civilization, and they bring institutional organized crime that absolutely destroys civilization. It destroys people. It destroys civic infrastructure. It destroys culture. They're like a whirling dervish of demonic force.
Yes, yeah.
And
it goes beyond our ability to imagine things. It's above. It's beyond our.
So I have to disagree with you there, because I worked with them in Washington, and I can't imagine that.
But the scale,
right? Well, it was clear they were looking to get the bit in their teeth, and if they got it, they would do any scale you can imagine. They would do the whole planet.
This is global,
right?
That's. I mean. Okay, I think that if we want to go back to this, I think that Kennedy's book, Robert Kennedy Jr. book on Fauci, is very enlightening.
Yeah.
And I think the most important page in that book is when Gates invites Fauci to his library when they have a meeting of people from around the world studying TB. And he takes Fauci to his library, and he says to Fauci, you supervise the biggest health organization in the US, but also in the world, infectious diseases thing. Why don't we team up? Why don't we work together? And he says that in so many words, so we can inject the world's population regularly with whatever the pharma people come up with. And of course, we know he has lots of interest in the pharma, etc. And there is where it starts. So what we have with the COVID thing, what we experienced was these two men, criminals. I can only think of them as criminals.
Right.
These two men, one of them has already taken control of the WHO. They are able to control the world in a way that it has never been controlled before on that global scale. They're able to make a large percentage of the world's population acts as idiots with masks, with obedience masks, as we call them with our magazine. The financial people weren't yet at that time in a position where they were after 2008 with the credit crisis. The credit crisis is 8 years after Fauci and Gates met.
Right.
And of course, not immediately after the credit crisis, but after a little while, they realized that the system, the financial system that they had nursed, it couldn't continue. It was sort of reaching a dire.
Go ahead. I'm going to back you up on that one.
And then they joined the crime syndicate. Now, I want to. This is how I see it. It's not one monster. It's not a multi-headed monster. There are little monsters side by side, and they have decided that it's to their advantage to establish what they want to achieve in different ways. Using this crisis.
Yeah, but Gates and Fauci are both on a payroll. And if you look at what happened in 1995, the establishment tried to broker a budget deal and it failed. And they made a decision as a group, that's it, we give up on this structure of government, it won't work. And that's when the financial coup started. And in fact, what the largest pension fund investor in the country said, the president of CalPERS said, he said, they've given up on the country. They're moving all the money out. And that deal busted in October 95. The next month, the predatory lending kicked off, and the FDA approved OxyContin, the opioids. And the reason why was, at that point, the only way you could then balance the budget, if you couldn't get the financial deal, the only way you could balance the budget was to bring down the life expectancy.
Right.
And the reason, so that's when the 21 trillion started to go missing.
Yeah.
And the reason every year I kept pounding the drum about the missing money was because I knew the only way they could balance the books, given that they were stealing all the money. I mean, they're levering the governments up and they're taking all the money out the back door. They had to bring down the life expectancy. It had to end in COVID-19. Right. There was no, it's math. And so,
well, you know about quite a few what probably are my blind spots.
No, but in the United States in 1996, a process started that I call the Great Poisoning, that Fauci was very much a part of.
Right.
And then Gates came in, but the Great Poisoning had started at November 1995. And it just kept growing, and then they piled in. But they came into that wave that had been decided by the central bankers in October 1995.
Mm-hmm. I think that I need to sit down with you another time.
That's what we're doing.
And get more details. You see, my knowledge there obviously is very limited.
So
what I see is what happens after 2000, and I think also it's necessary that it's after 2000 because it's from then on that we have not just a so-called narrative about things, but a prescribed reality. And that is after the 9/11 crime. The difference is that narratives are as old as, they go back to Babylonia or somewhere, probably. Governments have very frequently in history tried to deceive their populations, and sometimes very successfully so. Those are narratives, and you could go against them, and that was sometimes risky. But the difference between a narrative and a prescribed reality is what we got in 2000, is that if you don't publicly adhere to it, you lose a large part of your circle of acquaintances. You may even have to deal with a breakup in your marriage. No, I'm not joking.
Oh, no, I know all about it.
If you are a journalist, you certainly lose your income. Even if you are a professor at a university nowadays, you definitely lose your position.
Right.
That is the prescribed reality. And you don't need to believe it. It's comparable to say the Soviet Union. In the early time, you had to believe all the nonsense that you were told about, Marxist Leninism, etc.
Now, if you just parrot it,
but gradually, you didn't need to believe it as long as you obeyed. It is about obedience. It is about the establishment of a slave society. That's what it comes down to.
Right.
So, but that's the difference between the narrative and the prescribed reality.
Yeah.
And what you describe is still in a time of a narrative.
Right.
And there was still possible for different people to dig into it. And they wouldn't necessarily break up their marriages by doing so. And now they will.
Right.
If they publicly. If they privately, of course, they can, like we are doing. We have. There are many other people like that. So this is a big difference.
It's a huge difference. I want to come back around to 9/11, but first I want to go back in time, because when the United States, when World War II ended, the United States left an occupying army in Japan and Germany, but it was all under the rubric and the umbrella of this organization called NATO, which a lot of Americans didn't know about until Trump came along and said we ought to shut it down. So you have a very deep understanding of NATO, and NATO plays into what's going on in the Ukraine. So because I want to weave these different.
But that is not the NATO that existed when it started, and that existed more or less up to the disintegration of the Soviet Union. So there was a different NATO. It's set up specifically as a defensive organization.
Right.
It would not do anything in an offensive way. And that only began with the bombing of Belgrado and in the Kosovo War, of course. And since then, there have been actively offensive in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and of course they've destroyed Libya, reinstated the slave markets there. It is all terrible. The important thing about NATO is that it's not accountable to any entity in Europe. It's supposed to be a transatlantic organization, but the Europeans have no say over it. That is significant. It is in the hands of whoever is in charge at a particular time in Washington.
Right.
And it can be used for all manner of purposes that the person who is in charge in Washington wants to use it for. Europeans have no leverage over it. And if they wanted to stop it, they wouldn't know how to start. But it has had a very important effect on European intellectual life, I mean, the European intellectuals are, as it were, live in a cage where they offer. It's a no, maybe not a
It's
cage,
a huge budget.
It's a kindergarten. It's kindergarten in which the geopolitical developments are described like in a comic book.
Right.
With baddies and with it's unbelievable how simplistic it all is, and that has also made it impossible for literate Europeans, for people who normally would be critical of developments and would be able to follow the geopolitical developments. They're not capable of doing so. And they can't, of course, none of the member states of the European Union, at the same time the member states of NATO, can have their own foreign policy.
Right.
And the European Union cannot possibly have a foreign policy. So if people ask, what are you about? Very often, of course, you know what an entity is about if you can study its face towards the rest of the world. That you are about what you show in your face. But European Union has no face to the world. It's in use by the NATO.
So one of the first times, this is just a tangent, one of the first times I ever noticed NATO was a Dutch auditor who'd been appointed. I guess people take turns being the auditor. A Dutch auditor announced that there was 500 million or 500, but some huge amount of money missing from the NATO accounts.
Yeah.
I said, oh, they're doing it in Europe too. Okay. So let's go back to 9/11. Right after 9/11, George W. Bush and the neocons start all of this by canceling the missile treaty.
Yep.
And from then on, we see conversation and discussion in the U.S. intelligence and military community about creating first strike capacity against Russia, bringing Russia to heel, and steadily moving east to encroach on Russia, which has been going on since 2002.
Yeah.
So this is now 20 years.
Yeah.
So take us back there. Why did the Bushies decide to destroy the world this way?
It's interesting. Of course, the war on terror was a psyop.
Right.
A lot of what has overcome Europe and the Netherlands included, of course, is due to various psyops that grew out of the techniques that were already in use by the CIA, but that were highly developed in that period of the war on terror.
Right.
And there's several ways of explaining this. It's the economic necessity of having a Keynesian engine running underneath the American economy, and that is the military-industrial complex. It's important to note, many people do not realize, is that Russia doesn't have a military-industrial complex. It has a defense system and a defense industry that is pinpointed to making the right things. The military-industrial complex is very different. Go ahead, because you probably formulated better than I do.
But I would say in Russia, it's designed to defend the country.
Yes.
In the United States, it's designed to hire the country.
To make it all go around economically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because if you take out the military-industrial complex, you won't have that Keynesian engine underneath it all. You could replace it. You could say, all right, let's have a general infrastructure. And of course, some presidents have had precisely that idea. But once you have an institution or institutions that are, what the Eisenhower speech, the famous speech that launched the notion of military-industrial complex, the original draft had military-industrial congressional conflicts.
Right.
And you could add think tank, you could add a lot of other institutions, because they all had, with that existence, they all had a reason to exist. And once you have an institution, that has people that preside over it and people that do the whatever they do, and with salaries, etc. It's almost impossible to get rid of that institution.
Right. Oh,
and these
right.
institutions automatically get corrupted. It's part of, that's my study.
Well, I just
the corruption
checked this morning,
of institutions.
the S&P for the year is down 8%, and Lockheed Martin's up 26%.
Yeah. So I don't know how we got on this thing, but we have with the war on terror as a part of the official reality. Already at that time, you could still be critical. You could still have some. There were, of course, quite a few. It's very interesting is to see how the internet-based Samizdat channels, the various Common Dreams and Truth Out, and you name it, a lot of these things that mushroomed out of the internet during the George W. Bush period, that they changed. Today, they are cooperating with the CIA and the Democratic Party, of course, which has a completely different thing than at that time. And you see how also those institutions that were supposed to tell us the truth about everything get corrupted.
Right. Well, they try and find an economic model, and they fail to find an economic model that'll support independence.
I wonder, to some extent it's that. It's also, the people who run them don't have enough intellectual depth and don't have enough historical knowledge to understand it as much as they should understand it.
Right.
You see, I read this. I mean, I read the moment you see they're giveaway things. Every time I read somebody talk about Orwellian double speak, I know he hasn't read Orwell because it's newspeak and it's double think. And double speak has nothing to do with it. I mean, what is double speak? Lying, yeah, maybe. But I mean, but you know then, when you read that, you know that the person writing the article hasn't read Orwell.
Yeah.
And it would be good if he or she had read Orwell.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm drift off, but it's an opportunity to do so for an audience that usually in the past 2 years I've only been working in Dutch, no longer in English, which I used to do, of course.
So we were talking about the missile treaty, but so now we watch NATO being used to move east.
Yes.
So the Americans are using NATO and membership in NATO to try and encircle Russia and the land empire.
Yes, the membership, well, they can't. You see, NATO's rules, according to NATO's rules, you can't apply for membership. You can be invited to join.
Right.
And there is a rule that you can only be invited if the security of the other members is not going to be negatively affected.
Right.
In fact, it has to be positively affected before you can actually be accepted in NATO. Well, none of these things obviously apply to Ukraine.
Right.
And so, I mean, this is a very important point, I think. NATO and the UN, through its subsidiary agencies like the WHO and a few others, don't follow their official rules. They are, what is happening is...
It's what Lavrov said, the Americans are not agreement capable.
Exactly.
Right.
Lavrov, by the way, I think Lavrov is one of the greatest diplomats ever. I think what's happening now is very much something that Lavrov and Putin have worked out together with a very good national security group of people that are now able, this is important, I think, they're able to get rid of the Atlanticists, at least part of them.
Right.
Because you have a mayor in Moscow, which is been a problem for Putin, and you have a large group of people in the capital, but also in St. Petersburg, that still were dreaming of Atlanticist moves, that they wanted to be closer to Europe, and Europe has got the goodies that they, after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, the nice things that people could buy were from the West. So you had a lot of people thinking that if we join them, we'd be fine.
So what I've watched for 10 years now is Lavrov and the Russians consistently say, if you do these things, you will force us to act.
Of course.
And it's very interesting. Sir John Sawyer used to run MI6, gave a very interesting talk at the Oxford Union.
I saw that.
Seen it.
Yeah.
But he tells the story of Putin's story of the cornered rat.
Right.
And that's why my first, just looking at his body language, he says, oh, he's pleased. He thinks he's cornered the rat. So I just thought that was a very interesting. But you see them clearly trying to poke the bear. And I said to you earlier, the timing, if you look at this, the tsunami of media coverage on the Russian invasion that hit immediately, that tells me this is, that tsunami has been prepared for months and months and months. Both sides have been preparing for months and months and months. This is it has a feeling of being quite prepared.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think that what the people under Biden probably doesn't even think about. I mean, I don't know to what extent he can think about these things, but in the power vacuum that exists in the U.S., because Biden doesn't function as a president who is in the end accountable for what happens, for what the U.S. is doing. So you have, of course, the neoconservatives. They're very important. You have a number of other entities. I think that you also have a military that is not altogether with the neoconservative. But you probably know more about that than I do. But
I really don't. It looks to me like the neocons and the intelligence agencies have tried to start this war.
Well, what apparently was happening, and this reached when Putin came out in early December, and say, okay, let's discuss new mutual security arrangements. So I'm with an ultimatum. Said you have to sort of respond to this. This is what we cannot have, and that is, of course,
missile launchers,
the NATO encroachment of Russia, and so on. And it was responded to by it was as if it was a joke on the side of there's Putin again. He's got megalomania. He wants to extend. He dreams of restoring the Soviet Union type things. That was a response. At that time, it was clear that they were working on something, and to try to get Putin to enter the Ukraine, so that they could respond. They could tell the world, look, you see, we are always correct, right? So let's do something. Let's have a response. Whatever the response, I don't think they had worked it out, what the response would be. But then Putin does something very different from what they expected. First of all, he says there are two new sovereign states, the Lugansk and Donetsk. I recognize them. We recognize them. They are Russian-speaking. They themselves have declared themselves already separate from Ukraine. They did that soon after the coup d'état in 2014, and they have solidified that determination in 2015. And I now recognize them as such. Before, when they asked, do with us the way you accepted Crimea, he didn't want to do this. He wanted to leave Ukraine intact, and through the Minsk agreements, that could have been possible if the Minsk agreements had been followed. And the US stopped the Ukrainian regime from. They sabotaged the Minsk agreement, so it didn't happen. Then, by having declared these areas as sovereign states, these sovereign states need to be protected, because what was going on was an enhanced effort to. Well, there were constant bombings of the Donetsk and Lugansk areas.
And there have been for many years.
Quite a while, yeah.
Right.
14,000, and that's the figure that everybody uses. But this is probably much more than 14,000. And in the last months, this was intensified.
Right.
And you could expect a bloodbath. Any Russian president would have to have done the same thing as what Putin did. No Russian president, the same as with the Crimea. If the Crimea had fallen into NATO hands, it would be Sebastopol as the most important port for the Russian Navy, the only warm water port. It would have inconceivable that it would have fallen in the hands of NATO. So anybody who is at the head of the Russian state has to respond to this, and also to this more recent thing. So what then Putin does? He goes in there not to occupy Ukraine. He doesn't want to occupy Ukraine.
Right.
What he wants to do is to make it militarily, not of a danger to Russia, and he wants to, as he says, he wants to denazify it, to take the Nazis out, the Azov people, and a number of other Sloboda and other groups that have been active and that have, of course, probably had the most important influence in the regime.
So we see allegations of the Ukraine government trying to get a hold of nuclear weapons. We see allegations of biowarfare labs. Do you know if any of these allegations are meritorious or not? Do you know?
Of course. I mean,
sure.
we know. I read about the biological war and chemical warfare labs in Ukraine a long time ago. There were weird things that happening. They were genetically modifying mosquitoes. So, and this happened in Ukraine, and people were suddenly being stung by weird insects. They were taking a bath or something, and weird, and that could only be explained as something that would come from these labs. And we know that the U.S. has biological warfare labs all over the place,
all over the world, yeah,
and especially in that area. So
can I just point out, and this is for the audience, not for you, the last time the Russians tried to do something close to the American border was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yes.
And America took the position, you can't do this on our borders. We won't let you put first strike capacity on our borders. We won't permit that.
Right. Yeah.
Now, if Russia was doing biowarfare labs and these various things in Mexico,
yeah, of course.
I dare say the U.S. would have invaded Mexico long ago.
What you mentioned a very interesting thing, because here in the Netherlands, what happened in 2014 after the coup and the referendum that made it possible for the population of Crimea to not only vote for independence from Ukraine, but also to be reunited with. At that time, I read, of course, I followed it very closely, everything that happened, and I have a good archive still that I can consult. It's interesting, the commentary here, and the commentary from Britain is that, look, it's no longer the time for spheres of influence. That's something of the past. We don't do that anymore. And these are university professors who come up with this nonsense. As if, you know...
No, they're paid to come up with
No,
this.
yeah,
No,
well, you'd be amazed to what extent these people fool themselves.
really?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you don't underestimate the degree to which people can absolutely fool themselves, and then you think it must be coming from somewhere, or they must be paid by... No, they just fool themselves. And it's amazing how, to what extent they'll go fooling themselves. So, no, but imagine that the Russians said to Cuba, okay, and Mexico or whatever, we're gonna play around with some satellites, with no satellite, or with rocket launchers and whatever. But we don't do spheres of influence anymore. So Washington shouldn't respond to this.
Right.
No, it's really that you read this. I read this in what used to be considered as intelligent newspapers, the so-called quality newspapers that I used to work for myself. The NRC Handelsblad was supposed to be the top quality newspaper in the Netherlands. There is nothing left of it. This is, by the way, something that few people are aware of, that the media no longer exists in the way that they used to exist. I was part of it, and in those days, this was, I mean, a quarter century I did reporting from many parts of East Asia, and also a war and insurgents and rebellions, you name it, a lot of that kind of stuff. And it was possible, of course, it was sometimes haphazard the way in which these things were reported. It was sometimes, you know, not really all that honest. Absolutely. If people say that, it was never like, no, but it is wrong to say it was always thus, or it's never. That's not true.
You didn't have to parrot an official reality.
I know a world where your colleagues, amongst yourselves, you didn't tolerate a colleague who was consistently wrong in his or her assessments of things. Your reputation was based on your track record. And that means that you had to be extraordinarily careful. You couldn't afford to make a mistake. And that's why you stick to what is observable, what is possible to and yes, it's possible. And it happens in the US, it happened to some people I know who had sources and they thought, hey, we can rely on those sources, and they were used. This happened, of course.
Right.
And but what happened to that world, and this is something that people should realize, that world has disappeared because these media fell into the hands of a relatively small number of multi-billionaires.
Right.
And these people, these multi-billionaires form an oligarchy. It's very much part of what we are going through now with Davos and the World Economic Forum and all this stuff. A lot of what has happened cannot be properly assessed by many intellectuals because it has resulted from a power shift that's very important, or several power shifts. One of them is the importance of NGOs. The NGOs, totally unreliable the moment they are, because when they start out by idealistic people, they get hijacked. And people like Soros, of course, is a good example, and they get money. So they'll get the staff that earns a good living, and they get well paid, these people on top of the NGOs. And the NGOs become a tool in the hands of
they're kind of hip men.
Millionaires. So what we have today with the World Economic Forum and Schwab and so on is a coup. That's what it comes down to, by multi-billionaires with the help of NGOs. Without the NGOs, they couldn't do it. Without the media, the whole media power that serve not as messengers of what is happening in the world, but they serve propagandistic purposes. Without that, it has not been possible to. I
see what you're describing. I see all that as a marketing front for the central bankers.
Well, the central bankers, of course, they played an important role, but they weren't I think, wrong to reduce it it is always, reductionism is always something that you have to be very careful of avoiding, because there are so many factors that go into it. It's so difficult to trace, and there's also inconsistencies in this.
Right, but
so
for anything to endure, like an NGO, it's got to be financed. So I always go back to, where's the money coming from, and how is the money organized, and does it flow?
Absolutely,
Because,
and you are. I wish we had a hotline so I can call you and say, "Listen,
that can be arranged."
you probably have but I also think that it is a problem, and it's a trap to reduce things to one cause.
Right, absolutely.
There are many causes.
Right.
It's like the weather. We can't, you can't really. That's why it's another interesting thing, because this is something that is maybe go off the thing, but now we are talking at random. Why not? I think that what the supranational and the World Economic Forum and Gates and co want to establish is a technocratic tyranny over humanity. We know that, right?
Yeah.
And it will fail. Why?
I agree.
Because what I've done is study different systems of government in East Asia, and of course, I'm interested in the US and in European cases, and I separate conceptually the idea of technocratic governance and political governance. And I have to here, of course, it's not as clear and systematic as I make it appear, but I have to, for keeping it intelligible, technocratic governance starts from the premise that all the important questions have been asked, and we have to find the solutions. We have to do things to cope with the problems that we know exist. Okay, that's technocratic governance. It's not possible because the real circumstances, the contingencies are so huge, so enormous. Once again, the weather.
Right.
Political governance. For political governance, you have to constantly rediscover the question, the important question. What is the problem? If people ask me, give me an example. Well, in history, Bismarck is a good example. And today, the greatest discoverer of new questions is Putin. I think Putin is an example of the most talented strategist. What Putin has done in the time since he took over from Yeltsin is beyond belief. How enormous.
So I would say it's probably Putin and Lavrov. It's like a coin.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right.
And one of my best friends died recently. He was a top diplomat in the Netherlands. And when the Netherlands had this, you have for, I don't know for how many years, you have a seat on the Security Council. He was there in New York and all this. And he told me he regularly had dinner with Lavrov. And he told me how impressed he was with Lavrov as a person. As a person with... And so I have this from him.
And Lavrov, one or more of Lavrov's kids is still in the United States right now, right?
But it's Lavrov, and there are many others. I think that Russia has got on at the top, and this is thanks to Putin, because what he inherited from Yeltsin was beyond belief. All these oligarchs that had been robbing Russia blind, and all these the national assets, and that is how the oligarchs were created, of course, from this book. It tells it better than any other.
I wrote down the name.
This is really it's a. I mean, if you read every page of a book, then this is not good for you because it will take you many months to get through.
Tragedies, Russia.
But it's a fantastic book. And it tells you that story very well.
So I have on my list to ask you about the oligarchs, because I'm watching this incredible collection of oligarchs in London, in the Ukraine, in Russia, you know, a lot of it networked from Russia to the Ukraine to Israel. So if you go Israel, Ukraine, Russia, London, New York, you've got this sea of oligarchs who are in all these places. And I have to believe they're driving a lot of people crazy. And I look around at the sanction, I wonder, you know, did both sides get together and decide, okay, let's help each other take out half of our oligarchs?
Well, the sanctions now, are the anti-Russian sanctions, are also taking care of these oligarchs that are in London. And, you know, they are stealing their yachts, and I don't think the Kremlin is really worried about that.
No, I don't. I think the Kremlin is very happy
they're doing this.
Well, but I'm wondering. I haven't looked. If you look at how the rape of Russia occurred, you know, you had the Western intelligence forces and treasuries working with the Russian mafia to steal all this stuff. I'm wondering if they're not cleaning out the baggage from that. In other words, they created these guys to steal everything, but now that that's over, they're ready to get rid of them.
Yeah, possibly. Again, you know, when you see something happening, you think there must be a purpose behind it. It may be something that nobody had anticipated.
Right.
And you can't anticipate all these things.
Right.
Not possible. So I would argue against drawing too hastily conclusions.
Oh, I don't.
I think think is happening, and I think what we haven't come to this, but for the first time since the beginning of 2020, 2 years, for the first time, I see some light on the horizon. Because of what has happened.
So let's talk about that, because we all need to see some light.
Yeah.
And if you see light, then there's bound to be light. So I want to know more about this.
Well, the way in which Putin is moving extremely fast, the way in which the central bank, the Russian central bank, is now in a different position than it was. It was for a long time very much in it was very much in the neoliberal Atlanticist thing, and it is out of it. It is he's listening to this well-known Russian Glaziev, the Russian economist, who has always been critical of Putin for not moving fast enough on that score. And he has declared that Russia has to become self-sufficient. We no longer need the rest of the world. So what has he done?
Well, he pushed very hard to do that starting in 2014.
I know, and there are a lot of booby traps, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, okay, it can fail, but what he's done, he has taken on Davos. It's the first challenge to Davos, World Economic Forum, Gates,
so this is what you see that I don't necessarily see. So tell us more about that. How is Putin taking on...
He's using the sanctions. You know, because of the sanctions, he's created a new geo-economic system.
Yes.
And everybody thinks this is to the disadvantage of Russia. And to some extent, of course, that is absolutely true. At the same time, he has reinstated the state.
Right.
And this is what is the World Economic Forum all about, and Schwab all about, is to do away with the state.
Right.
And, you know, we have in a previous issue of Gezond Verstand, we have a series of articles.
Which one? This?
That go, I will show it to you later on. A series of articles about the history before the recent moves where you have the private sector ruling it over the public sector.
Right.
And I see this beginning, a long time ago, of course. You'd have the Multilateral Agreement on Investments, and then that fails because of the 9/11 thing. It's off the thing. Then we have the ideas of the IPP and the IPP and the IPCP, etc. And of course, you have in the US the agreement with Mexico and Canada, etc. And all this is is designed to give to start with agreements that will give the private sector a power over the governments, over the public
Right,
sector.
so you use international treaties to outfox constitutional government.
Precisely. And of course, the most extreme form of this is what the World Economic Forum has always wanted to do, accomplish.
Right.
And this, what they are after, the Great Reset, is precisely that. Not all of capitalism, because the small and medium size in the things, they don't participate. It's only the very big ones, and of course the financial entities. Now, this is what, and this is the disappearance of the state. Europe was an easy victim because the European member states of the European Union had already transferred lots of their sovereignty to Brussels.
Right.
They couldn't really do very much anymore. Right. So they were, and the European Union has turned out to be a monster. Really a terrible thing, with people like Frans Timmermans, who mentioned earlier, and especially Ursula von der Leyen. It is beyond belief that a person like, I mean, she failed as a Minister of Defense in Germany, but then when you fail there, and they can give you a top job in the European Union as long as you obey the instructions that we give you. So the European Union may well be the most dangerous thing for Europe ever, if this all continues. When they, on the 1st of July, they will sign something that will give all of us in Europe a digital idea. And that is the same thing as what was talked about for a long time, where it's it records the injections you've had and lots of other things, and a budget, a CO2 budget, because if you create too much CO2, you are really endangering the planet and all that nonsense, and it's also part of it. This is it's being signed on the 1st of July, and probably they're going to make it operable in the autumn. And then we have this is the newest thing. The WHO is going to be the sole authority over all the member states of the UN. Everybody, all members of the UN, and automatically then also the WHO, must obey when the WHO says this is a pandemic. And this is what you should be doing. And pandemic is not only the biosecurity thing, which is being, no, it's also the nature, it's everything.
Right.
And this means that Bill Gates is being given, Bill Gates has become the world's greatest authority over everybody.
Right.
That is the design. Whether it works, I mean, whether it's actually going to come about is, of course, another question. But it's beyond belief.
Here's the thing. Would Russia sign that?
No, that's the whole point.
Right.
What I'm now talking about, Russia is the first challenge to all of this. Russia says it's the state. You see, we have a problem with a lot of thinkers in the West who are of a libertarian persuasion, because they think that the state is the greatest evil ever invented and many people think so. But then you have, interestingly enough, you have a website, Lee Rockwell, you probably are familiar with it. These are people who come out of that, and they are, to some extent, there are different varieties, of course, of libertarian. And they now realize how important the state is.
Right.
They've all taken it for granted.
Right.
The state is the only thing that enables citizenship. You can't be a citizen of the European Union. You can't be a citizen of the world. That's just a wonderful metaphor, but it is not real. Right. And you can only be a citizen of the state. So there is no democracy without a state. It's only possible in the context of a state. And this is what Putin is re-establishing the state as the most important political entity, with the responsibility of looking after its population.
Right. And so the question then is, how will China and India support that?
They are, until now, they are supportive. China, it's a very difficult very difficult thing, because people in Europe tend to think that this passport business, and this registering of everybody, is like the social credit system in China, and to some extent that is probably true. But I think that the Chinese system is fundamentally different. It's not about control; it's about harmony. And the Chinese, and this is something that I also know because of my experience in Japan, the ultimate aim is harmony. The ultimate aim is
well, it's
to
harmony
avoid
and risk management.
to avoid disharmony, which is a reason for conflict. We
Right.
don't want that. And the Chinese have this. It's Confucianist. It's many things in the Chinese background, and you see that of course, it leaves you to some extent unfree. At the same,
The spirit of it is very controlling.
it's yes and no. What I hear from people who live there and who describe how it works on the ground. It's not like what people say about it here.
It's nowhere near as demonic as what they're planning here.
I'm not
right,
advocating it.
I know, but if what the West is planning is much more demonic.
It has a different ultimate aim.
Right.
It's the unquestioned rule of an oligarchy above everything, of
Yeah, but one that's willing to
billionaires.
literally invade your mind and your body.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, this has already, of course, happened.
Right.
And there are people who have been injected with stuff that is so awful. And we haven't actually begun talking about this. This is the greatest crime ever, I think. I think the number of victims, the number of deaths in the end are going to outnumber all the deaths in World War II. And it's happening right now under our very eyes. The people who are discovering this and who are making this debatable subject in the US particularly are the insurance companies.
Right.
With the insurance companies, all of a sudden there's a 400% increase in life insurance payments. And
Right.
and undertakers, they're saying, we can't keep up with the dead bodies.
So the one question I have is, will the government arrange? They've put in place the system they need to keep it secret. Will they arrange a secret bailout of the insurance industry? Because the insurance industry, if you look at how things are going right now, if that continues, they can't financially
Right.
handle the load.
But in the US, you have a very interesting development. In the FBI, of course, can go all over the place, and they've just started a new division, pick up anybody who spreads fake news or whatever they call it. But you have a federal government that comes with mandates, and you have states that say, "No, it's not our mandate."
Right.
If you hear DeSantis talk, and if you see him, young people behind him, and the first thing he says is, take off those weird masks that you are. It's
DeSantis, that's a great video. That's one of the top videos of the quarter on the Solari Report. Yeah.
So, and it is, of course, it's unbelievable. If you see the whole Biden crew, always with these masks, and also, of course, in Europe with Ursula von der Leyen with that mask, they are so silly. They look so unbelievably silly, and they look so unbelievably obedient.
Right.
They're
That's
all being
the goal.
had. Also, the ones that are participating, they're being had. They don't realize what's happened to them. They don't realize that they have subjected themselves to a bunch of criminals.
I'm assuming they're being very well paid to, it's theater.
Yes, but, okay. Is it worth, is it worth making a fool of yourself?
Well, not to you and me, but that's why we're here and they're there.
No, it's true. Okay. No, I often wonder, of course, what goes on in these heads. Perhaps very little goes on in these heads. I don't know. But But now back to Putin. What he's trying to do is establishing Russia as a state. The central bank has to serve Russia. You have, if you, the Russian, of course, Russia is indebted to quite a few countries. All right. You calculate in rubles. They'll give you in rubles.
Well, that's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. But if you look at Russia's debt to GDP, so America's debt to GDP is 128%. Russia's debt to GDP is 18%.
Yeah.
After the rape, they never took the debt back up.
Course,
I mean, that's the brilliance of what happened, because I was over in the Yukon in 2005 when the Russians sent one of their national security advisors to study the gold market. And he went back, and that's when they started to accumulate gold, but they never took the debt up. So they accumulated gold. They managed to do everything they've done, keeping the debt down. And they are not in a debt trap. No. That's the brilliance.
Yeah.
So it's a very unique thing to have a country not in the debt trap when they move to do this.
But this is a contest between Davos and the Kremlin. This is the first challenge to Davos.
See, your framework is different than mine. Your framework is different than mine, and your framework is much more optimistic, so I want to stick with yours.
Yeah, no, of course, and I am fully aware of the problems and of the ways that things can go wrong. But the first thing that I try to, when I think that I've understood something, I try to find arguments or things that go against it. I must understand what I may fail to see. And so that is the first thing you do. And that's what I'm doing every day now. This is what I'm doing. And I see.
Well, I've known you for 2 years, and you've been doing it every day since I've known you. So.
But anyway, so this is enormous. This changes. This really changes the geoeconomics of the thing. And
So I want to bring up something. A couple of years ago, we published a Solari report called The Rise of the Asian Consumer, where we looked at the phenomena. So you came back from Asia in approximately 1990, just as we began pouring money into the investment. I mean, we'd invested in Taiwan and Japan, but G7 really started to pour money into Asia and the South China Sea area.
I came back in the late 90s.
I thought you came back in, okay.
In the late 90s.
So you began to see the rise. And now what we're watching is an enormous shift, because instead of the world being controlled by the sea lanes and now the satellite lanes, we're watching the rise of the land empire and the Silk Road. And what I've been watching just as an investment advisor for the last couple of years, Wall Street has been taking public Russian companies that are going to basically, their job is building out that land empire and Silk Road. And of course, the underwriters on sort of some of my favorite Russian companies are Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs. Bam, the invasion starts. Who's in the market buying up Russian equities and Russian bonds? Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. Now, what I see is this is happening when that rise of the land empire is really about to take off. It's been happening, it's been percolating, but now it's really going to take off in a big way. And before it does, there's a repositioning. But I see the Western financial interests intend to be on both sides of this thing.
Well, they probably are, yeah.
Yeah, and so if you look at a move for Russia, China, India to become much closer financially and emerge a multipolar world that builds the land empire, I see the City of London, I see the Western financial interests preparing to make big, big investments and profits on that, especially with all the money they've pulled out of the United States and the West.
Yeah, as long as they're permitted to do so.
They're permitted. I mean, they're doing.
Well, no, I look at Japan, and I see that that Japan under the American with respect to foreign policy, etc. There's no question. But what Japan does locally has always been what Japan wanted to do, And if if they go along with market this and market that and financial this, and they make very sure that, and then they bring the whole. It's interesting the Carlos Ghosn scandal. He was right. But they bring in somebody to repair a car company, also as an example to reinvigorate the Japanese industry, and they then put up with a lot of foreign stuff. But at some point, we stop it, and I think that the Russians. You see, there is another aspect to all this that maybe I'm going off on a tangent now. Mm-mm. What you see, I have written about this quite a lot, and I've organized a few conferences, also one at the University of Amsterdam, and that is about the kind of things that the Western economic wise people could not see in what happened in Japan. The communists the Bolsheviks took over in the beginning of the 20th century and created the Soviet Union. Took over from a Tsarist system that was still feudal, neo-feudal.
Right.
There was no clear separation between private and public. And of course, the communist command economies don't recognize the separation between private and public. So what had to happen when Yeltsin took over was a clear separation of private and public, but they couldn't do it. And then they had these oligarchs that started robbing the country blind again, and moving their money to the US and London and all that. What Putin now is doing, I think, is establishing clear, separate private and public sectors. And I have seen the attempts in Japan to do that. In fact, at one point, because I wrote about this, so people came to me, and one of them was the great-grandson of a minister of finance in the Meiji period, that were when Japan modernized, and he was ordered by the government, which came to power through a coup also in Japan. And he was ordered to establish a private sector. Oh. And this fellow, he invited me for dinner, etc. And he came up with stories that had been in the family. He, of course, was far away in time scale, very, very far away. But they tried to establish a private sector. And what it meant, now, you can't have a public sector without a private sector, and vice versa.
Right.
You can only have a feudal system, and of course, in Western history, you had a gradual. It took 200 years or something with the growth of the bourgeoisie. Cities at first, and then with a lot. It's a very interesting story, and few people realize how important this is. Now here we have in the West, because of the European Union and because of the growth of the private sector power over everything, we have and the public-private partnerships and the outsourcing. All this has helped erase the line between private and public.
Right.
And what Putin is doing is establishing a private-public sector.
Right.
For the first time. Russia has never had that before.
Right.
And this is what I think is so very interesting. Well, it failed on the Yeltsin, as we know, and he had to do it. I think...
We're going to run... Are we in danger of Russia being the only location for both Christianity and capitalism?
Well, now you are... It's very interesting you say this, because although I've recently read somebody comment who said, well, you don't even have to be a Christian as long as you don't believe that there are more than two genders. That is another very sore point for, it's not only Christianity, it's culture in general.
Right.
And it's clear that when the Russians look at the the unbelievable deterioration of standards, of all manner of standards in Europe, in the West in general, that they want nothing of this.
Right.
But he is a Christian, a devout Christian, as far as I understand.
Right.
He was baptized in secret by his mother. His father would have lost his job if the father had known about this. He is already, from what I read a bit on, on Putin and what his colleagues in the various phases of Putin's career said about him, that he really believes.
Right.
He is a genuine, not somebody who does this as is often.
Well, I'm trying to remember. I think it was 2014. Could have been later when I don't know if you remember his Christmas speech, when he kind of went off. I think it was at St. Petersburg. He went off on the immorality of the West.
Yeah.
And of course, half the audience is really uncomfortable because he's bringing up all these things we don't talk about in polite society. But you could see. I think when you function in those roles of responsibilities, you see how powerful culture is. Absolutely. And how it can destroy a country.
Absolutely.
Right.
And how the upending of ideas, beliefs that were fundamental to a society, like male and female, like what is marriage, what is all these things. If you upend those, you prepare a society for accepting a lot of nonsense that was being pushed down their throats in the last 2 years.
If words have no meaning, then you get the neocons.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So let's talk about the neocons. So, what do the neocons do now? I mean, they've had free rein to destroy Syria, Libya, country after country. Now they're being held accountable.
Yeah, if Putin succeeds in doing what he is set out to do in Ukraine, then I think it shows up that the neocons are powerless, can't do it. It will certainly place them in a very unfortunate light. And that is why it's also dangerous, because there may be a last-minute attempt to achieve something that nobody at this moment can anticipate, or will anticipate maybe but you don't know in what form it will take. What I think will happen is that there will be an attempt to establish a government in exile with Zelensky as supposedly the head of state, and this will probably be in Poland. That's the only place where it can be. And
so you have a counterinsurgency force.
Yes, insurgency in, and they have these mercenaries, the what is now called academy, and
so do you try and
the
bog
former Blackwater?
Do you try and bog the Russians down in the Ukraine forever?
Well, how it works with insurgency. It's a nuisance, but the Russians aren't there. It's the Ukrainians who have then elected a different president, who has sworn that he remains neutral. He's not going to side with the Atlantic, with the Atlanticists, and so it will be. But my impression is that Putin doesn't want to have the Ukraine as a permanent thing around his neck. What probably will happen is a partition, because when you look at the language map, you'll see that the Donbass is very much, of course, a very independent-minded Russian-speaking, but then you have a large area that's Russian-speaking, and then you have an area that's mixed, Russian as well as Ukrainian-speaking.
So Kiev is a very important part of I'm told, the Russian Orthodox tradition.
Yes, yes.
So do you keep
the
Kiev?
Rus, that is important.
How do you relate?
But the distance between Kiev and Donbass, it's a little bit there's a little bit longer distance between Kiev and Donbass than it is between Kiev and Lviv. Lviv, ik weet niet how, I don't know how to pronounce that. It's on the Polish border.
Right.
But it's a huge distance.
Yeah.
So the question is, of course, the new Ukraine must have a defendable border on the Polish
Well,
side.
if you take Kiev down the river down to Crimea,
Yeah.
that's your eastern side, which is much more Russian than
Yes.
the western side.
Yes. But it probably won't be that clear.
Right.
And I don't know. I won't predict that kind of thing. I have no idea. But I think that there has to be there has to be a border that can be defended on the Polish side. And if the Poles want to start making trouble inside Ukraine, it's going to cost them.
So
And,
it seems to me the Poles have a problem because if you, and I don't trust the media on this, but according to the latest media reports, they have 1 million new citizens.
Well, yeah, and of course we're getting them here, and we don't know who they are, what kind of people they are.
Yeah, so we're sending the Nazis.
They're Nazis.
Right.
Some of them
We're
are
sending-
Nazis. Yeah.
Right. So we've seen that before with when you get these huge wave of immigration, all the organized crime moves in.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
So you have what's reported to be 1.5 million. I mean, the announcement came several days ago that the EU would give 3-year residency to any Ukrainian without a passport, which means, you know, what my friends tell me is, you know, everyone from many different countries is going to try and come to the...
I mean, at the moment, Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, it's beyond belief, not elected, not shown any kind of merit or capacity to lead anything, leave alone the European Union. But it doesn't matter because the European Union is under... This is why I said earlier, if Putin succeeds in what he's trying to do, the US will probably be happy, or at least part of the US will be very happy that the spell that you know, was started by Fauci and Gates and Schwab, that the spell will break. That's important. I think much of the rest of the world, and we've already seen that India and China, of course, isn't part of the anti-Putin League, and neither is Africa and Latin America, and quite a lot of East Asia. The Japanese are in a funny position because they have to obey the US to a large extent for foreign policy purposes. But domestically, they have always gone their own way. And I know for a fact that that the elite at the top, you know, they are not part of this American thing. I talked to them. This is my recent years in Japan. I haven't been there now for 5 years or so, but before then, I was talking a lot about the relationship between the US and Japan, and I don't believe this is carved in granite. I don't think so.
No, it's very interesting. You know, I just finished doing re-underwriting of several dozen Japanese companies. You know, they've kept the West off of their boards. They don't let them in.
Absolutely.
Right.
And this is important, and I think that maybe Russia has also understood that Japan's success after the Meiji period is actually... you're familiar with the import substitution industrialization. And that was the development model that was also followed by the Philippines until the new theories caught on, that no matter how poor, no matter in what state of development, countries must already belong to a global everything. So they will be reduced to subcontractor status.
Right.
And what happened in the Philippines is that, you know, it used to be the most promising country in East Asia.
Right.
I mean, only Japan was ahead of them. And I was there in the 60s for the first time. I saw it
Right.
with my own eyes. It was prosperous. And although there was, of course, a great deal of poverty, and then it changed
Right.
because of this. Import substitution industrialization was done away with, and they became subcontractors. I've actually organized a conference on that story with the UN University in Tokyo, and with people from the Philippines and from Thailand, etc. I think this was my field. This was something that I was working on, and you see that. What happened in history was that Friedrich List, he was a German who had a diplomatic position in the U.S. He was somewhere. I don't remember exactly his function, and he saw the American method of industrialization, and he saw how this, and that was very protectionist.
Right.
And he told the Germans, that's how you do it. And then he influenced the Japanese. The Japanese learned from Friedrich List more than from anyone else. This is how you do it. And of course, the Japanese economic development is a wonderful story. And at one point, I knew a lot of details. A lot of that has, of course, I have to go back to my earlier writing to remember what I wrote about it. But anyway, this is what the established economists in the US and in Europe cannot talk about, cannot write about, because they're not familiar with it, with this history.
Well, but it's not part of the official story.
Economic pseudoscience has done away with history. And that means the political dimension has been removed from it.
I'm going to have to interrupt you because there are a couple things I want to go into before we close. So one is, it's March. The Russians have invaded. We don't see where they halt. We don't, but this can go in a variety of different ways. So they either achieve their goals in the Ukraine or they don't. Now, let's assume for a second, just for purposes of the conversation, they do achieve their goals this year in the Ukraine. Given the tsunami, the shriekometer has never been turned this high of vitriolic. And, it's vitriolic on the Western side. On the Eastern side, they've just passed a new law and thrown all the media out of their country.
Yeah,
so the BBC,
right.
Everybody is gone.
Yeah.
So you have this, this real antagonism. How does the West dial it back from here?
Well, it's an interesting question, and of course I've asked myself the same question. I had discussions about it recently with people who work with me. And to go back to what I mentioned earlier, there was a nuclear bomb, propaganda bomb released above the Atlantic basin. And the fallout and the radiation has affected seemingly everyone. I mean, the orchestra say Sergeyev can no longer conduct here, and Russian sopranos who don't distantiate themselves from Putin can no longer sing for the Metropolitan Opera. You have ministers in the Netherlands that order their churches to ring bells in sympathy with Ukraine, and go on and on and on like this. They're crazy. I mean, this is insanity. But I think that the anti-Russia, the anti-Putin understand the anti-Putin, what do you call it, hysteria? The anti-Putin dogma will stay with the top, but ordinary people underneath. This is, do you remember anybody who gets worked up about the Iraqi weapons of mass destruction?
Well, but here's the thing: as these events wind through. Look, I'll just speak for America. The average American is facing the loss of subsidy. In other words, the American consumer was a spoiled creature
Yes.
at the center of the earth.
Yeah.
as they lose the benefits of that
Right.
subsidy of the reserve
Yep.
currency and these other things, as you know, the whether they lose it because it's eroding or they lose it because the oligarchs get all of it or the billionaires get all of it, you know, what is happening is Putin is the scapegoat. So the Fed is, you know, the Fed's creation of, you know, fantastic increases in the money supply is not causing inflation. It's Putin who's
Right.
causing inflation.
Right.
So it's a very convenient scapegoat
Yes.
for everyone.
Yes. How long does this last in the U.S.? In Europe, I think that we must look at Germany. Scholz has sort of said, okay, we're not going to, you know, the Nord Stream 2, we're not going to make it. He hasn't said it's forever gone. He's just
Right.
said,
He
you
said
know,
we're not certifying, but
So German industry is going to find ways to open that faucet, that spigot, or whatever you call it, and
they have to or they're going down.
Exactly. The German elite won't have a pleasant life if German industry goes under.
Right.
German industry cannot allow to go under. And German industry will go under if Schwab has his way. And German industry will go under if they remain hostile towards the Russian Federation.
Well, that's why, to me,
So you see, I think you'll see a change in Europe. And then the German example may have an effect in the rest of Europe.
I mean, right now it looks like Germany's committing suicide.
Yeah, as committing suicide. Yeah, of course, as many people have noticed. And it's not only the Nord Stream 2.
Right.
It's there's the crazy idea of going to a zero emission of human emission of CO2 by 2030, and then you know it's so crazy. It's beyond belief that intelligent people go for this nonsense. The human, you know, who started this? It's Maurice Strong.
Well,
He was
yeah.
one of the Rockefeller Foundation. He was an adoptee, intellectual adoptee by the Rockefellers.
If you look, and I want to study it more, but if you look at what they're proposing, it's really a way of shrinking access to resources by the retail and preserving it for the top and the corporations. It's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, it's, but you can't, you know, you cannot have a prosperous Germany that is comfortable for the elite unless you have German industry.
Right.
And the same goes for the rest of Europe.
I
And they will see this, they will know this. And you see, okay, well, here I live in the countryside. And if you go to Amsterdam, they're all crazy. They're all, you know, you can't talk with them about any of the stuff that we have discussed now. Especially this is something that I noticed we haven't talked about my
and I want to. That's on the list.
but you know, it's the higher educated people who will only write for us under a pseudonym. They can't afford to write under their own name because they can't afford to deviate from the prescribed reality. They can't. But the people around here, this is a polder. This is meadows around me. We don't see the cows now.
Oh, I didn't realize this was a polder.
You know, and it's the people around here. They don't believe all this stuff.
Okay, so for the American audience, I just have to stop and you have to explain what a polar is.
Dutch polder is it's what used to be
ocean.
water or morass, swamp. It's made dry and
It's land built out of the water.
It's land extracted from water or a swamp.
Yeah.
And so it's the pride of the Netherlands, and we have fantastic cows and lambs and everything.
Well, if you look at the profits of the Dutch Empire, it was basically reinvested to double your landmass.
Of course, the Dutch Empire was a seagoing empire.
Yeah.
and that was the pride of the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And they were in the business of exploitation of lots of the rest of the world.
Right. And competing with the Brits.
Yeah, of course. At some point, the Brits took over, and
Yeah.
that was when
It's the East Indies
no,
versus
it's
the
the
Dutch.
Act of Navigation by what's his name? Famous political figure in. I mean, my memory. This is the problem, you know. When you are, I'm now. 18,
You know too
next
much.
month I'll be 81.
You know too
and
much.
I forget these names, but he passed the Act of Navigation, and what did it say? It says all goods brought into Britain and taken out of Britain may only be brought into and taken out of Britain on British ships, British
Right.
boats. And that was the end of the Dutch seafaring empire.
Right. Okay.
Cromwell.
It was Cromwell.
Yeah,
Okay. Two things. We see the WHO Treaty being negotiated. We see the EU moving to do the digital ID. So while everybody's distracted watching the Ukraine, we see very quietly a huge move for digital control, and the digital control grid. You know, I always say it's turning our homes into digital concentration camps. And it's being done very quietly because it was running into huge opposition. The passports were running into huge opposition. Now it's being done very quietly, stealth, to pop out later this summer.
Right.
What do we do? How do we stop it?
I think that people who have their QR code on their phones must throw them off their phones.
Right.
They have to, but how do you get them to do this if they don't see the slavery that is ahead of them if they don't? It's massive civil disobedience is necessary, but it was necessary for quite a while now, and it is.
Right.
We are trying to encourage it, even though, I mean, I'm not an activist in that way in organizing things like this, but I'm in the business of telling them, of giving them of reporting to them what is happening, what is visible, what is factual that is happening. But they're close. They're close and especially, as I mentioned earlier, especially within the European Union. They are not the Netherlands is not a sovereign, independent country.
But if you
anymore.
look at the WHO Treaty, if Russia doesn't come in, and some of these other countries that are giving them a financial backdoor don't come in, could that bust it?
I know if the Russian example that the state has to be reinstated as the most important political entity if you want to have a citizenship, if you want to have democracy, if you want to have a prosperous life. You go. I mean, if you want to continue with the European Union, you have to follow the goals notion of the Europe of the nations. That means a real federation where the various members will agree or disagree with different policy proposals and participate with this and not with something else. And that is I think the only way in which it will work. Otherwise, it will be you will give up the citizenship. That's it.
Right.
Citizenship is what, and many people
you'll get
don't know what it is.
You'll get taxation with no representation.
Exactly.
So, so every week I do a wrap up of what's going on called Money and Markets with a fellow named John Titus, who wrote our CBDC.
Yeah.
So John wrote the CBDC analysis, and he refers to Klaus Schwab. He picked out Fauci, Schwab, Gates, and Soros, and he calls them chew toys. And a chew toy is like those rubber bones that you give a dog. Okay. And he says he predicts that Schwab, Fauci, Gates, and Soros are going to be the chew toys. They'll be thrown to the crowd to eat. Now, even if that's only, a bone to the dog, I, for one, would love to see Klaus Schwab thrown to the crowd to be a chew toy. But I find Schwab to be, first of all, whenever I look at him, he so reminds me of Blofeld from The Spectre that I can't not laugh. But the other thing is, I'm watching behavior that makes no sense to me. So let me give you an example. Occasionally, I will write a letter to the editor, kind of thing. So I watched a video of Schwab speaking at the Boston CEO Club, introduced by the chairman of Bain Capital. So here's a guy who's promoting the end of personal and family wealth, being introduced by the chairman of Bain Capital, who was so obsequious it was embarrassing. Mm-hmm. So I decided, okay, I'm going to write a letter to the investor relations department at Bain Capital and ask them whether or not Bain Capital, as a matter of policy, believes in the end of family and personal wealth. Yeah. Of course, I didn't get a reply, but now I'll publish the letter. Right before then, Davos does this series of lectures, during their meeting with Yellen, the Secretary of the Treasury, getting on, again, totally obsequious and unctuous toward Schwab. So here's the person responsible for the Treasury market, basically, sort of acting in hero worship of somebody who's proposing, again, the end of personal wealth and capitalism. And you think, what? Do words have no meaning to any of these people? Well, then Van der Leyen gets on and gives a speech that was the weirdest thing I couldn't finish. It was so unlike the person who, if you look at her first week as the head of the ECB, she struck you as human. This was beyond strange. Mm-hmm. So you think, who is this guy? Is he
Schwab?
Yeah, I mean, he's.
I met him once in Singapore. There was a World Economic Forum Asia edition, and I was invited to talk about Japan. And I went against the grain of the Japanese detachment of our top businessmen, after which I became friends with them. That's how it works in Japan. And but I saw Schwab. He asked me about Japan, etc. And then a biggie arrived, and he just got up and left. And, But at dinner, Lee Kuan Yew was still alive, and Lee Kuan Yew was no longer the president. He made Singapore, as you know.
I have all the biographies of him. It's one of
Lee Kuan Yew was a very interesting character, of course, but he was then chief minister, etc. If you saw at dinner the behavior of Schwab with Lee Kuan Yew, well, he didn't actually go on his knees and worship him with, but the next best thing. It was unbelievable what a show that was. So that's my direct experience of Schwab. He has been, he is tickled pink every time he sees a royal pass, as Prince Charles, and our queen is our queen, I say, but my impression is that the king isn't exactly all too happy about this, but he is a collector of royalty is fine, fame is fine, and what he does is he has the best network. This is it. This is the best of the young global leaders. And when you go back to the names of the young global leaders, that was Macron and Merkel, Trudeau, and so on. Interesting that Zelensky has said that Zelensky, who is going to run the government in exile for Ukraine, he patterned himself after Trudeau. Trudeau was his great model, his great example. And you see pictures with him where they are, and he is a very interesting thing, because here you have it worked out. Some people say, but Schwab has said that Putin was a member of the young global leaders. And this is very important to make this distinction. the young global leaders undergo a testing period. Putin probably, when the World Economic Forum came up with this new thing, young global leaders, he wanted to sniff at it. He wanted to see what was going on, because Putin has to be informed. So he said, I'm going to have a look at what you guys are doing. And so Schwab can say, hey, he was a... No. What happens is that the young global leaders, we have a nice cartoon in one of our issues about this, they can be accepted if they are amenable to the theory, but it's a sort of a weird ideology that Schwab works with, and people who accept this and people who are easily influenced are accepted.
Right.
So that includes Macron. It
right.
includes
A lot of people have gone in and
people with
gotten
their own
in.
opinions out.
Right.
And Putin is an example of that. So you have Putin, he is out, but Zelensky is in.
Yeah.
Wonderful. We have the
But
Kremlin
many people have been cycled initially into things like that. Now, I don't think it means a lot.
No, it means very little.
Right. Right.
But the people who stay in and who influence, like, Trudeau is a very good example, and Cynthia Freeland, who underneath him is probably even more important. They're all World Economic Forum.
So when I was in Washington, we used to call those guys poodles. Nobody took them seriously. And, although their positions had some power, but everybody knew they were just poodles. And I think it's taken the world a while. This is the beauty of the truck convoys. It's taken the world a while to really believe that the poodles are as bad as they are. But once the world cottons to the fact that the plan is as crazy as it is, and the poodles are as bad as they are, then we see a shift. And I think it's one of the reasons the narrative is shifting from COVID to war, because once the general population gets it in their head that the leadership is incompetent, then it's a new world.
Yeah.
And I think that's, one way or another, that's part of what's happening right now. Mm-hmm. So, okay, next 3 months, you're doing this. How are you going to have fun?
I tell you that with this recent development in Ukraine, I felt in my element. I mean, I got up at 2 a.m. I had to have the latest, and 5 minutes before the thing had to go to the printer, I finished 3,300 words, and it was at first too. I had to.
It's
take
like
out
being
things.
25 and back in Tokyo.
No, but it has to be. It has to be.
Yeah.
Of course, and I enjoy it, but I'm also very tired. Mm-hmm. Maybe you notice. And
no, you look great.
Yeah, I know, but and then after that, I did various brief videos and updates of what is happening there, and we got between 400 and 600 new subscribers because of those videos.
Yeah.
So that's it works because I need more subscribers.
Well, but also your insight and your analysis, I think, is very.
We have about 30,000 people reading it.
Yeah.
It's about half of those, you'd say, are subscribers, but it's read by more than one person.
So, at the beginning of the year, we published an interview with Wim Hof. So, and it's about his new book, The Wim Hof Method. Are you familiar with the Wim Hof Method?
No.
If you're going to keep doing this, we may want to turn you on to we're going to send him a copy of the Dutch Wim Hof Method. So, do you know who Wim Hof is?
No.
The Iceman?
Oh, yeah, of course. No, yeah, but, okay. It's one of those.
Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
I've been doing it. We have a colleague who runs our Future Science series, and she's been studying and doing Wim Hof for years and has tried to talk me into it. And then last year I had a boating accident. It really knocked my health. And I thought, okay, I need to be radical. And I said, Uli's always right. I'll try Wim Hof. And you know something? It's fantastic.
But if I did it, I'd probably end up in bed with a bad cold. In fact, I have one coming up now. I can feel it in my throat.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Absolutely.
So I should stop talking.
No. You haven't asked me about the magazine. That's the most important thing.
I love. Well, first of all, I always love your covers. Your covers always
Yeah.
make me laugh.
Yeah.
And this one of Schwab, I have to hold it into the camera. How do I?
Yeah.
Oh,
You're going to like the next one.
Oh, really?
The next one is Alexander Nevsky. You know, in every Russian city you have a Nevsky prospect, right? It was
Yeah.
a great hero, Alexander Nevsky, and it's one of the greatest films ever. Eisenstein film, Alexander Nevsky with music by Prokofiev. It's just magnificent.
What is it?
Alexander Nevsky, and he defeated the Teutons and Crusaders who came to conquer Russia.
Yeah.
And the Teutons, of course, the Germans, the Teuton Knights, and the very famous film that was an example for many Hollywood directors. I mean, anybody who knows film will know.
What's it called?
Alexander Nevsky,
That's called Alexander.
Alexander Nevsky.
And the music is.
Prokofiev. It's a
Prokofiev.
magnificent piece of music. And of course, in those days, there were no sound movies, so they had a symphony orchestra and a choir. It's fantastic.
Okay.
And a cover is Alexander Nevsky. And any Russian who sees this knows where our sympathies lie.
Okay. Well. Thank you very much for this wonderful interview. Before we close, anything else that you want to add?
Well, you see, it's interesting to see that there were, when this began 2 years ago, basically. It's March.
Yeah.
2 years ago, on the 11th of March, was the official pandemic announcement.
And you decided.
I had with a friend with whom I sometimes did video things. We were the first to discuss it, and on the 5th of April, I did the first solo thing for one of those video channels. Where I said, this is not a real pandemic, this is manufactured, and this is, etc. This is put together with lies. And then I continued doing this, but I was with another friend who has a similar video channel, and I said, look, Tom, we can do all this, but it doesn't. It's cyberspace. It gets all diluted in cyberspace.
We need to make
we
hard
need something on paper. And then soon after that, an old friend of mine, with whom I done the 9/11 thing, he visited me, and after we had exchanged pleasantries, he said, "Karel, what we should do? We should have a weekly." Now I hadn't thought in terms of weeklies but I said, "Okay, let's do that." And we have a bi-weekly, and what it does. It reports on things that are important for the Dutch community, and more than the Dutch community, obviously, and for our future, and that are either not reported on by the mainstream media or very distorted by the mainstream media. That is so we don't write about things that the mainstream media do report on. Which, if it's reliable nowadays, it's I think only the cooking, sex. Anyway, not even that, because Borscht is now out, of course.
Well, but the interesting thing about your writing is you have a.
But this was the end of June, and the end of September we had the first issue.
Yeah, I remember. I saw it.
And we had no idea that it would become as popular as it did. Because there is clearly, but we are nowhere close to reaching the people who should read it, because they've all they've heard about this is a conspiracy theory rag, and conspiracy theory. This is the single most successful psyop detail of the CIA.
Well,
the conspiracy theory.
What I find, and it takes time and it takes patience, is that these things develop and move virally.
Yeah.
And people are hungry, and the beauty of what you write is you just have significant depth that is very rare, and that's what people want. That's what they need.
Yeah, I think they see. They also, it's reporting. It's not an opinion magazine. There is some writers sit back a little bit and they draw some, this hypothesis, but it's very clearly the hypothesis is based on observable reality. It's an absolute. I don't go into areas where some people say you must do this, you must do that. No, because I can't do any reporting on it. I can't observe it.
Right.
And it's reporting, and as I mentioned earlier, your track record as a reporter depends on, your reputation depends on your track record. You can't
Well,
be
you're giving
wrong.
me plenty of incentive to improve my Dutch. Okay. Thank you for joining us on the Solera Report.
Thank you, Catherine. It was wonderful
And
talking with you.
Promise you will come to Stavoren to go sailing with us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that was a
yeah.
possible offer, but sailing, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
May's the best month?
Wonderful.
Okay.
You'll see me.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Same to you. Bye.